Hey everybody, welcome to my weekly live training. Just a quick little update before we get started on today's topic. It's raining a lot outside. I got caught in the rain on my way to the gym. So I literally got soaked. So all my shoes, my clothes are wet, my hair is wet. But yeah, this is my favorite weather. I love rainy weather. I know it's not everyone's favorite, but I personally love it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. So today I'm going to be teaching you guys what is the safest way to train to prevent injuries and maximize your gains. Okay, let's let Adolfo in. Cool. So I did another training previously that covered it didn't cover the training aspect when it came to injury prevention, but I covered all the other key details for how to prevent injuries and also how to rehab your injuries if you got a new one. So we're not going to be covering all of that today, but if you do want to watch that training that covers all of that, just let me know. I have a video training and a guide on it as well. So yeah, today we're just going to be talking about essentially the safest way to train to prevent injuries from occurring, and also how to train if you have a pre-existing injury, the safest way to train in that scenario, and how to maximize your gains in the process. So I know most of our goals, like our main goals, are to build more muscle, build more strength, and become leaner. But you should also prioritize your lifting longevity, meaning basically like your lifting life. Like how long can you sustainably lift? Like ideally, you want to be able to lift for the rest of your life, even into old age. Resistance training is extremely beneficial for preventing aging, in terms of quality of life, in terms of preventing hips from breaking. You hear a lot of times old people break their hips, they'll fall and break their hips. So it's so crucial for preventing just your quality of life from going down. Plus, of course, it also helps to maintain your muscle mass, your strength, and your body composition. So that should be one of your other goals, is your lifting longevity. So with that said, if you want to prolong your lifting longevity, then you need to be able to train not only effectively, but also safely. So there are two main things that you want to pay attention to, or that you should have in your training, in order to make it as safe and effective as possible. And the first one we'll cover in a second. The second one is the most important, but I do want to cover the first one as just like a baseline because it's going to tie into the second one. The first one that you want in your training is control. Whenever you are doing an exercise, you want to have complete control over how you perform your reps. And that is really important and key. So often than not, I will go in the gym and I see people just like fleeing the weight around. And not only is it not as effective for stimulating your muscle, because in essence, you're cheating with momentum, but it can be incredibly unsafe. The more peak force that you have, meaning explosive training, like you just let's say you're doing bench press and you do explosive training, which is like you push it as hard and fast as you can. There can be risks to that. And also okay, so let me give you another example. So like Olympic lifting, when they do an overhead snatch, for that lift, you do have to use momentum. So from a muscle perspective, in a sense, they kind of are cheating because they're using momentum and inertia to help them get the weight up. And of course, because of the speed at which they are lifting, there's also a higher risk of injury. So I'm not saying that you can't compete in those sports. The topic of this is what is the safest way to train in the most efficient and effective way to maximize your results of becoming strong, lean, and muscular. So remember, that's the context of this. Okay, so when you have control over your lifts, you automatically have to remove peak force, remember explosive training, and momentum. And so what are you left with in that scenario? You're left with basically all of the weight on your muscles, which is the point of resistance training. The point of resistance training is to stimulate and fatigue your muscle fibers, but you can't fully or safely do that if you're just flinging the weight around. So control is the first step. And then the next one, part two, and this is the biggest one. A lot of people don't know about this and how effective and safe it can be. And that is slowing down your reps. Yes, slowing it down. So when you slow down your reps, like the positive and the negative, which is the up and the down, you automatically are incorporating the control aspect. You're removing peak force and you're removing momentum. But because you are slowing it down even further, you also automatically have to reduce the weight to a degree, because you basically have to control your muscle in a slow and steady rate. So, and that is incredibly, incredibly safe. And in a second, I'll come into how it is so effective as well. Let's see, what was I going to say? Oh, dang, I hate when this happens. I had a thought on that matter and then it just disappeared from my mind. Okay, hopefully it comes back. So yeah, slowing it down. Dang, I can't remember what flow I was in. Okay, so yes, anytime that you reduce the weight, you are able to slow it down and fully focus on the muscle. And when you're reducing the weight, you're also additionally removing pressure off of your joints, ligaments, and tendons, which again makes it more safe. Having more just, basic control does that as well. But when you slow it down even further from there, it takes more stress and pressure off of your joints, ligaments, and tendons, and places more of the pressure on your muscles, which is the point of resistance training. Now, I know some of you, especially those of you who are experienced lifters, you probably have this inner thought like, oh, like you can't stimulate sufficient gains with less weight. Like heavy weights is the only way to go to effectively do that. That's not true. If you still train to failure, like what I teach you guys in this group, you are still fully fatiguing and stimulating your muscle fibers. And you're still driving mechanical tension, which is the main driving force between hypertrophy, muscle gains, and strength gains as well. So it doesn't matter if you have to reduce the weight to make your reps more slower and safer. If you still train to failure, you'll still get just as good of results as if you were lifting with heavy weights conventionally meaning like most people typically do like a 1 second positive and like maybe 2 second negative. So you'll still get just as good of results if you still train to failure. And, if you're concerned about training to failure and it's, how safe it is, it's even more safe. It's all the more safe if you train this way, if you slow down the reps and you control them. So the recommended rep pacing that I suggest to train this way is something between, I'd say if you're not injured, like you don't have a pre-existing injury, and by the way, I'm not talking about brand new injuries, which still have inflammation. You should definitely rehab and ice that first and go really easy with your training if training is still appropriate for that time. So when I mention injury in this training, I'm specifically talking about something that is not a new injury. It's a pre-existing injury that the inflammation has already gone down. So if you're not injured, I typically recommend a 3-3 cadence. So that would be 3 seconds up, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, and then 3 seconds down, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. And that's really effective. You can even play with a 4-4 or 5-5 cadence. If you have an existing injury, then I would recommend going even slower than that. So typically something between a 5-5 cadence and a 10-10 cadence. So 5 seconds up, 5 seconds down, or 10 seconds up, 10 seconds down. I don't recommend going any slower than the 10-10 cadence because at that point, it's really easy to get in this, it's really hard to keep your movement smooth when you're going even slower than 10-10. It kind of becomes like segmented where you pull it and then you stop and then pull it and then stop. So that was just a little bit, it's harder to flow with that one. So Ken Hutchins has a similar approach to this. He developed super slow. It's a way of training that is similar to this. And he originally designed it for women with osteoporosis, which is, basically brittle bones. And so when you have brittle bones, and you want to incorporate resistance training, because we know resistance training strengthens our bones, but at the same time, like people with osteoporosis, you don't want to break their bones, right? So he basically started training them with this super slow approach, 10 seconds up, 10 seconds down, complete control, no momentum, no hoisting the weight up, no flinging the weight around, anything like that. Complete control and slow and controlled and training to failure. And he found that they saw significant muscle gains and strength gains in a really short amount of time without injury to their brittle bones. And then later on, because he was just so amazed at the results, he tested it, or a group of people tested it on, normal people. Well, all I mean by that is they didn't have, injuries or osteoporosis, and they saw significant gains as well with that same approach. 10 seconds up, 10 seconds down, controlling the weight, not flinging it around, only doing one set to failure. And yeah, it was just extremely effective and extremely safe. People who typically train conventionally, they frequently get injuries very often. And we know anytime you get an injury, it sets you back for a period of time, whether it's for, a week or a couple of weeks or a couple months or even a couple of years, depending on how bad it is and your ability or knowledge on how to rehab. So again, this all ties into lifting longevity. We want to maximize that. So not only can we keep making gains, week after week after week because we don't have injury, but also because it's also extremely safe overall, long-term, including when you get older, and it's sustainable for the rest of your life when you get older. Yeah. So let's see. Okay, cool. Covered that. Okay, so the next part is what are safe exercises? So we covered how to safely train. So we also want to cover what are the safe exercises. So I often see people in the gym or people on social media, they're doing these basically silly exercises that look complicated, and because they look complicated and might feel difficult because they require a lot of balance or coordination, they think that they are, you know, stimulating adaptations in their strength or their muscles, but they're actually not. All they're doing is improving their skill in that specific exercise. So, as an example, one exercise that might fall under this would be like squatting on a Bosu ball. Um, a Bosu ball could either be like the whole ball, like it's just an actual ball, it's that squishy ball, or it could be like the half Bosu ball that has um, like a hard base on one side, and then it's just like half of a circle, and then they're squatting on top of it. You also might see people do like dumbbell bench press on those things on the Bosu ball. Um, so those are just two examples of like silly exercises. They're difficult and hard to do because they require a lot of skill. But do you think you're going to fully fatigue your target muscles doing that exercise? So let's say you're doing squats on a Bosu ball. Do you think you're going to fully fatigue your quads and your glutes? You're not. You're going to challenge your ability to balance yourself, and your muscles might get a little bit fatigued because you're having to balance so much and use coordination, but you're not going to fully fatigue your muscle fibers and create mechanical tension, which again is the driving force behind muscle hypertrophy and strength gains. So really over time, if they keep doing that, they're just improving their skill in that specific exercise. But skill from one activity is not transferable to a skill in another activity. So, you know, if your main goal is to improve your balance in a Bosu ball squat, then cool. Keep doing that and improve your skill on that. That's awesome. You know, if that's your goal. You're not going to change your physique with that. You're not going to increase your raw strength with that. And that balance for that exercise is not going to transfer to balance in, say, a different exercise. So it's silly. And then, you know, the main point of all of this as well is not only is it ineffective, but it's also incredibly unsafe. Anytime an exercise requires a lot of balance and coordination, it's on the higher end of the scale of being unsafe. You know, safe versus unsafe. The more balance and coordination, the more unsafe that it is. So let's go on a scale of things. So if we were to go on a scale of like, you know, some of the most unsafe exercises because they require a lot of balance and skill and coordination to the safest exercises, I'll give you an example of that. So squatting on a Bosu ball, very unsafe. Lots of coordination, lots of balance, lots of skill. In the middle of that would be something like, you know, doing a heavy barbell squat. There's a degree of balance, there's a degree of skill, but it's not nearly as, you know, great. It's not nearly as, you know, it's not on the same end as the Bosu ball and squats. And then further on that line is anything that supports your joints and ligaments. So think of like something like a leg press. Not only there's no balance required, your back is supported and your hips are supported. So in that regard, it's both effective and extremely safe. Now, I'm not saying that like, you know, squats, bench press, deadlift, they require a degree of balance and skill. I'm not saying they're ineffective. I'm just giving you an example of like if things were on a scale where those types of exercises would be. So, you know, if you're wanting to fully fatigue your muscle fibers so that you can get the best muscle gains and strength gains. Then you would want to focus on the main lifts like squats, bench, and deadlift. But the safest overall would be machine lifts, machine exercises. If, of course, the machines are well functioning, they're operating well, and they fit you well as well. So, so barbell squat and leg press, they both work the legs. They work the, predominantly the quads and the glutes. With the barbell squat, you have to practice the balance aspect of it and the skill aspect of it. There's a lot of skill behind, the intermediate and advanced levels of squatting really heavy. Whereas with leg press, not so much skill needed. You're just pushing with your legs, no balance. And so because you have all this support on your back and your hips, you're really able to focus on just the muscle. So from an effective standpoint, they're both extremely effective, but in terms of the optimal safety, then, if you're really that concerned about it, then the machines would be a better option. So I personally recommend that you have a blend of like the main lifts, like squat, bench, deadlift, chin-ups. So a blend of those main key lifts that are really great at developing raw strength, but also combine that with machine lifts that that provide the stability for your joints, so that you can fully fatigue your muscles from a bodybuilding perspective, while also being extremely safe. Now, I will say that if you're a beginner and you're not wanting to invest the time and energy to learn the skill component and balance component of those main lifts, and you just really concerned about changing your physique, building overall strength, and all that stuff while being extremely safe, then the machines they're great options as well. And then if you have an existing injury, and let's say, you like all those main lifts, but you feel like you personally need a break from that to fully recover your injury, then that's totally fine. Just focus on the machine exercises, and those will be great. And as long as you're still training with control, training very slowly, and training to failure, you will still get just as good of results as, anything else, as long as you're training to failure. Now, if you're injured, then you may not, if you don't feel comfortable training to failure, like your injury still feels a bit iffy, that's totally fine. If you're training in this slow way that I'm teaching you, but you train within failure, like within 3 reps shy of actual failure, you're still going to get great results. You might not be able to get away with 1 set, maybe for a time. But if you're concerned about that, then I would do at least 2 sets and you're good. Okay, and then the final point on this subject is for like having the safest way of training is minding your recovery. And that includes both in your actual workout while you're working out and throughout the whole week, like how your recovery is after your workout days leading up to your next workout day. So when you're training with super high intensity, like I recommend training to failure, it's so important to be conscientious, and this is a learning process for everybody. It's important to be conscientious of your fatigue levels during a workout. So for example, I'm more of an advanced lifter, and I know how to train to failure. So I do train to failure. And because I take every exercise to failure, I can only do, like, depending on the day, max like 7 or 8 different exercises, and I'm done. Like, I'm pooped after that. And so it's really important to learn, like, once you come to that point where your fatigue levels are just so high that you're not going to get any additional benefit by doing any more sets, that you just stop. You don't force yourself to do more exercises or more sets. And that's going to help prevent injury as well. Because when you're super fatigued, that is prime for developing an injury. And that ties into also your recovery during the week. So I only work 2 times a week. Some more advanced beginners, I recommend 3 times a week until they learn how to train to failure. So you are, and by the way, that's a very rare way to train nowadays. Most people typically work out 4 to 6 times a week. So switching to working out only 2 to 3 times a week, you're automatically going to get more recovery days, which is great. But there can still be, that occasional week where you might not feel recovered enough to go into your next workout. That's totally fine. You should listen to your body and just take an extra day, maybe two, to get that extra recovery in. And then when you're feeling mentally and physically able to get another intense workout in, you can do so. Now, most programs, which, they recommend lifting, or they require lifting 4 to 6 times a week to be effective. And that is because they have a lot of junk volume. Anytime that you have more volume, you have to sacrifice intensity. And the reverse is also true. Anytime you have more intensity, you have to reduce the volume. You can't have both at the same time. So those programs that require you to lift 4 to 6 times a week, they will have scheduled regular deloads. A deload is a time, usually a week, where you either don't work out at all for an entire week, or for that whole week, you reduce your intensity and your volume. So it's a very light, easy work. And the reason why they do deloads is to give their body time to recover, because that damage, so to speak, builds up over time when you're working out that frequently. Now, if you're working out like how I recommend, lifting only 2 to 3 times a week, training to failure, you really don't need to schedule in deloads. Unless, for some reason, okay, let me put it this way. As long as your sleep and your nutrition are solid and you're only working out 2 to 3 times a week, that should be plenty of recovery days, for the most part. And you don't need to have a whole week where you don't work out at all. But that doesn't mean that if you did have that week off or whatever here and there, rarely I would suggest, that you'll lose your gains. There are studies that show that you can take as much as 3 weeks off away from the gym and not lose any strength and not lose any muscle mass. Of course, as long as your nutrition and sleep are in order. So yeah, those are the 4 main things. Let me go ahead and summarize all the points so that we get a clear picture of what to focus on when it comes to making your training as safe and effective as possible. So the first one is to control your reps, meaning remove that momentum, remove hoisting and flinging the weight around. That's also going to remove peak forces as well, meaning speed. So you're not going to do anything explosively. So you're going to have more control. And when you have more control, you're able to stimulate the actual muscle fibers themselves more effectively. The second one is to slow down your reps. Typically, if you're not injured, 3-3 to 5-5 cadence. If you are injured, 5-5 to 10-10 cadence. That's 5 seconds up, 5 seconds down, etc. And as long as you still train to failure, training slowly is just as effective as conventional lifting, where, you do maybe a 1 second up, 2 second down, like most people do. It's just as effective. The third point is to stick with safe exercises that don't require significant skill and provide support so you don't have to practice balance. So basically, in essence, well-fitting and operating machines are the safest, but also the 3 main lifts 4. I like to say 4 because I include chin-ups with that, are also great options as well because they're also very effective. And then the fourth one is to be mindful of your fatigue within a workout. So don't push past that level. That's when injuries are primed to occur. And also be mindful of your recovery throughout the week. If you need an extra rest day, that is totally fine. Don't feel bad about it. You're not going to lose your gains. If anything, it's only going to help your gains because with the way that we train, lifting only 2 times a week, super high intensity, training to failure, it's best to just take that extra rest day or two and come back fully ready and prepared to work out again versus having fatigue, having, really sore muscles and not reaching any PRs, personal records, because you're fatigued and not feeling it. Like, it's kind of pointless to do that with the way that we train, that is. So don't do that. Cool. Does anybody have any questions? Hey, Adolfo. Let me see if Facebook has any questions. Okay, so Mark says, for the example of squats, if you're injured and pushing to failure risks getting pinned under a heavy load, would you recommend doing a few sets shy of failure instead of one all-out set? I'd say if you're injured and you're squatting while you're injured, don't train to failure. I would recommend if you're going to squat while you're injured, and everything is feeling, pretty okay, obviously if it hurts, stop. But if everything's feeling pretty okay, then yes, I would stay shy of failure, probably within 3 to 4 reps shy of failure. But like I was talking about earlier, if you have an existing injury, it could be a good idea to just take a break from the main lifts in terms of doing them heavily, that is. Like, for example, I hurt my back last year in April, my back and my hip. And I went from squatting like really, really heavy to basically it hurt to just do body weight squats, like air squats. So I didn't go back and do heavy squats right away. I just practiced the air squats just to keep the movement up of squats because I didn't want to lose that. But for my more stimulating set for legs, I did leg press instead. So I started with squats, super, super light, just to keep the movement and the practice up of squats. And it also helped to rehab my back and my hip, which that is in my other training on overcoming injuries. But for actually stimulating my muscles more adequately in a safer way, I did leg press. I did it super slow. And I trained very close to failure in that set while I was injured. So that is what I would recommend. Cool. Let's see. Adolfo, I think you're still on. Do you have any questions? Okay. I can't hear you if you're talking. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining. I hope you'll have a great day. It's raining. I love it. I'm gonna go eat dinner and then I'm gonna shower and then probably just play video games on my favorite type of day in the rain. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this topic and I will answer them.